Sergeant Vire. The larder job. Rain had been falling for hours, a grey drizzle that seeped into the corners of the barracks and settled into the marrow of the soldiers. I leaned against the doorway of the kitchen, letting the cold and wet cling to my tabard. The smell of burnt onions mixed with the sour tang of mouldy bread, and the noise of Marta's pans clanging against the stone made my teeth ache. The whole place had the low hum of a hive, with a hornet trapped inside. I was tired. Not just the kind of tired that comes from marching 20 miles in wet boots or keeping the night watch, but the kind of tired that sits under your ribcage and eats away at you like a rat gnawing at wood. I'd been in this regiment long enough to know that loyalty and law were not the same thing, and yet, here I was, standing in a kitchen, staring at a cook, like I could somehow extract the truth about the larder thefts with a look. Marta was a small woman, with hands that looked like they had never seen a day of rest. Her hair was tucked under a greasy kerchief, streaked with smoke and flour, and her eyes darted like birds at the first hint of shadow. She had been here longer than any of the captains, longer than the colonel himself, and she knew where every loaf, every salted meat, every barrel of wine was stored. But she wasn't just guarding the supplies, she was guarding herself. I knew enough about Marta to guess the rest. She had a brother in the southern mines, a husband who had disappeared into the frontier, and debts that would have made a banker blanch. Every coin she pocketed or every piece of food she hid wasn't theft, it was survival. But now she was caught in a problem that wasn't hers. Someone had been raiding the larder, taking more than just scraps, and it had the quiet sort of consequences that could ruin a regiment from the inside. Morale broken, rations low, soldiers growing suspicious of one another. I cleared my throat. "Marta," I said, my voice carrying the kind of authority that only comes from years of being ignored before someone finally realizes you're serious. "Someone's been helping themselves to the larder." Her back stiffened, and she didn't even look up. "Rats?" she said. Her voice was flat, but there was a tremor hiding in it, the kind you get when you're weighing consequences in your mind. "Ghosts? Sprites?" I pushed the door wider, letting my shadow stretch across the floor. "Not rats, not spirits, someone clever. Someone who knows the schedule, knows the back storeroom, and doesn't stink like a common thief." Her hands froze on the rolling pin. The tremor became noticeable, and for a moment, I thought I'd misjudged her courage. "And you think I know who it is?" "Don't think," I said. "I know you know." She let out a slow sigh, the kind that carries years of worry and too much flour dust. It's Captain Jerrick," she whispered. Her words were careful, measured, like she was testing the floor to make sure it would hold her weight. "He's been taking meats, wines, whatever he fancies, claims it's for morale, says it's to keep the men in good spirits, but I know what it is. He's lining his own pockets, feeding his pride, and if anyone finds out—" Her voice trailed off. I could see the fear in her eyes, the way she twisted the kerchief in her hands, the way her knuckles whitened. It wasn't fear of me, it was fear of the consequences if I didn't handle it right. That's what makes a cook like Marta both dangerous and trustworthy. She's not a soldier, she's a survivor. I let her words settle like fog in the kitchen. Captain Jerrick, a man with medals enough to patch the sky and enough ego to tear a regiment apart if crossed. Telling the colonel would be the easy route. It would be neat, clean, proper, and completely disastrous in ways you don't realize until the mess hits the floor. The colonel liked to think the regiment was a family. Families don't act well when one of their leaders is caught thieving. The rot spreads, suspicion blooms, and morale dies a slow death. So I didn't answer right away. I let the silence grow thick between us, letting her fear and guilt swirl in the air. "Leave the back door unlocked tonight," I said finally. "I might pay Jerrick a little visit." Her brow furrowed. "And if he catches you?" I shrugged, the motion tired. "Then I'll catch him again. And again if I have to. That's the job." She nodded slowly, a smirk flickering on her lips, almost teasing. "If you do, make sure he knows the knives are real." I didn't need a reminder. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the world felt just as slick and dangerous. A captain stealing meats, a sergeant deciding whether to obey orders or his own sense of justice. Somewhere down the road, someone was going to get hurt, and it might not be me. I moved through the barracks at night like a shadow with boots. Corridors smelled of damp wool, sweat, and unwashed bodies. I listened, not just with ears, but with the kind of attention that comes from walking too many hallways and hearing too many lies. Low-ranking soldiers were here, there, and everywhere, pretending to sleep, pretending not to notice the big coat that shuffled past. I stopped a pair of them near the latrine. "You two," I said, letting my shadow fall across their faces. "Hear anything unusual about the larder lately?" They stuttered, eyes widening. One of them, a wiry youth named Falco, tried to laugh it off. "Nothing, Sergeant, just the usual. Rats smells the wind." I leaned closer. Rats don't take wine. They don't pick salted hams by hand. Now, I can ask nicely, or I can break your kneecaps one at a time, and see if that helps your memory. Falco gulped. "Well, Captain Jerrick's men, maybe. Sometimes he's been around late at night." I let that sit, like a hot poker on a chair. Enough to get the story without making the boy wet himself entirely. The rhythm of the barracks at night was subtle, predictable. Keys jingling, the creak of floorboards, the occasional cough or groan. But the places where the quiet didn't fit, that's where the truth lived. By the time I returned to the kitchen, Marta had puttered about, humming, under her breath, as if the pans themselves could keep secrets. "He won't stop," she said softly. "Not if someone doesn't act." I nodded. "Maybe not. But if I act, it won't be the way the Colonel expects." The larder itself was a small, stuffy room, lined with barrels and shelves, stacked with salted meats, dried fruits, and jars of pickled vegetables. Every item was catalogued, every barrel marked, and yet, someone had been meticulous enough to avoid detection. That's the sort of work that takes patience, skill, and a confidence bordering on arrogance. And that's the sort of work I respected. Even if the man doing it was a thief, I could feel the moral weight pressing down like the rain-soaked stones above my head. Loyalty to the regiment, my own personal sense of justice, the consequences of tattling, versus handling things quietly, all of it tangled into a knot in my chest. Expose Jerrick, and the Colonel would parade him before the ranks. The morale hit would be instantaneous. Let him continue, and the supply problem worsens, and someone else might get caught in the crossfire. I leaned against a barrel, hands on the rim, and let my mind wander through the past. There was the time in Westbarrow when a sergeant had squealed on a superior for theft. The punishment came down, yes, but the soldiers' trust evaporated. Men stopped reporting, started hiding, and the regiment had nearly unraveled from the inside. I didn't want a repeat of that, but I also didn't want the larder raided into nothingness. Night deepened, and I made a decision. I would confront Jerrick myself. If he fought, I would fight back. If he resisted, I would be ready. And if he tried to talk his way out, I would listen, but only because I wanted to see the guilt in his eyes, the exact same way I saw it in Marta's. I watched Marta as she scrubbed a pan, her movements deliberate, almost meditative. She wanted to protect herself, and by extension, the regiment. I respected that. I respected her for surviving, for balancing fear and duty like a tightrope walker over a pit of vipers. I planned carefully, the back door left unlocked, the shadows as allies, and the timing such that Jerrick wouldn't see me coming until it was too late. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper in the hall, every flicker of candlelight became a note in the score I was composing. As I stepped into the night, I thought about what could go wrong. The Colonel might catch wind, mutiny could start. A brawl could spill blood, and I could end up with a hole in my chest, or a court-martial waiting for me at dawn. But the choice had been made. Some battles were meant to be fought quietly, in the dark, with knives that are sharper than words. And if Jerrick didn't like it, well, I didn't need his approval. Confrontation. The night held its breath, as I crept along the shadowed corridor, toward the larder. The smell of damp stone and rotting wood was thick, but it didn't matter. My senses were keyed, every echo, every creak, every distant cough a note in the symphony I had been composing all evening. Marta's warning had been simple: leave the back door unlocked. But I added a few of my own touches. I paused outside the larder door, listening. Soft shuffles, the low hum of conversation in hushed tones. Captain Jerrick, his voice, smooth and arrogant, carrying authority like a wet blanket. "Make it quick," he said. "The Colonel's inspection is tomorrow, and we don't want any delays." I smirked under my hood. Quick, yes, but I wasn't the one to rush. I slipped inside as a shadow among shadows. Jerrick was crouched over the shelves, moving jars of preserved meats into a sack lined with oilcloth. Behind him, 2 of his men stood watch, knives in hand, eyes alert for trouble. They didn't know I was coming. I cleared my throat lightly, letting it roll like a pebble down a quiet hallway. Jerrick froze, then turned, grin spreading across his face. "Sergeant Vire," he said, "I should have known you'd sniff out trouble like a fox in the henhouse. Come to lecture me on rations?" I let the shadow of my blade catch the dim candlelight. "Lecture? No. Just wondering what a captain of your standing needs with extra meat, wine and preserves." His grin faltered, replaced by the practiced smile of a man who's always been caught in minor misdeeds, but never by someone clever enough to matter. This is for morale. Every regiment needs incentives." "For morale?" I stepped closer, boots silent on the stone floor. "Or for pride?" He tensed, and I caught the slight twitch in his jaw. He was used to men following orders, used to fear and respect, but not used to being cornered by someone who didn't play by the same rules. "You think I'd stoop to—" Jerrick started, and I interrupted with a cold chuckle. "Don't bother. I've got the proof, and I've got witnesses. Marta told me everything. And here's the thing, Captain. Your little side business doesn't just hurt supplies. It eats at morale, creates suspicion, and puts the regiment at risk. And I don't snitch. Not unless it's clever." Jerrick's men shifted, glancing at one another nervously. They had the drop on me physically, yes. But I had something far more dangerous: a plan, patience, and the knowledge of the barracks like the lines of my own hand. "You've been playing a dangerous game, Sergeant," Jerrick said, trying to regain his composure. "You could report me, and the Colonel would—" "Would what?" I asked. "You think a captain caught red-handed is going to be treated fairly? Or that the men wouldn't whisper and lose trust if they knew? No. The Colonel gets the satisfaction of surprise and I get my fun." Jerrick narrowed his eyes. "Fun? This is no game. You're outnumbered, your men are asleep, your authority is—" I interrupted again, sliding a glance at his men, letting them feel the weight of my presence. "Your men, by the way, are in exactly the positions I want them." They stiffened. One of them, a lanky fellow with a nervous twitch, tried to edge closer to Jerrick for reassurance. That was when I saw it. The pattern in the way they had arranged themselves around the larder. They were predictable. And predictable is exploitable. "Sergeant?" Jerrick's voice trembled slightly. What are you doing?" I allowed my grin to stretch. "I'm letting you play your hand, Captain. Every move you make tells me where your accomplices are. And when I'm done, everyone you brought with you will be in one place, and no one can claim I've tattled." The tension in the air thickened, like the fog rolling in from the barracks' outer walls. Jerrick's men whispered amongst themselves, realizing the game had changed. I was no longer the hunter of a cook's secret. I was the predator of a predator. I circled slowly, keeping the shadows between us. "You see, I don't report unless I have leverage, and tonight, I've set the stage. Every barrel you've touched, every jar you've moved, it's all part of the trail." Jerrick's grin faded completely now, replaced by the tight-lipped mask of a man who knows the walls are closing in. "You can't," he started. "Watch me," I said, drawing the last bit of tension like a bowstring, letting it hum in the still air. Suddenly, the larder door creaked behind them. I didn't flinch. The moment was expected, controlled, part of the plan. From the darkness beyond the door stepped Colonel Savannah, his boots silent, his men arrayed like shadows themselves. "Sergeant Vire," he said, voice low but commanding. "It seems we have a surprise inspection tonight." Jerich's eyes widened. Twice now, caught red-handed, first by Vire, now by the colonel himself. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. His men, frozen mid-step, realized the trap had closed entirely. I let them stew in it. "Colonel," I said lightly, tipping my hat. "All set for the demonstration." Savannah gave a brief nod, then gestured to his men. They moved swiftly, quietly, surrounding the captain and his men. No one could claim surprise. No one could claim betrayal. Morale remained intact, and the regiment stayed unified. Not because Jerich's thefts were forgiven, but because justice had been served cleverly, quietly, and without unnecessary spectacle. Jerich tried a last-ditch effort at defiance. This is a setup." Savannah's voice cut through the tension like a sword. "Twice caught, Captain. Twice, and Sergeant Vire did exactly what any officer in this regiment should. Solved the problem without spreading chaos. Your games are over." I leaned against the wall, arms crossed, letting the tension drain like water from a battered cup. Jerich's men slumped, defeated, while Marta, standing quietly at the edge of the room, let out a silent breath she had been holding all night. "Sergeant," Savannah said quietly, "you've maintained morale, enforced the code, and caught thieves in a way the regiment can respect. Well done." I gave a small nod, a half-smile playing on my lips. "It wasn't all me, Colonel. Sometimes the shadows speak loudest." Jerich's humiliation was complete, not because he had been caught stealing, but because he had been outplayed, outthought, and exposed in a manner that preserved the integrity of the regiment. That's how the rifle worked. Justice had a face, yes, but it was clever, strategic, and sometimes merciless. Marta stepped forward, giving me a small nod. No words needed. Her trust in me had been justified. Her fear turned to relief. The larder was safe, and the lesson had been learned. The rest of the night passed quietly, the barracks settling back into routine. Soldiers murmured about the unusual inspection, but the story had been told in hushed tones. No tattling, no unnecessary drama, just a quiet, undeniable enforcement of law and order. Morale was preserved, and the message was clear: theft and deception might be clever, but the rifle, and Colonel Savannah, were cleverer. I stepped outside into the night air, rain-soaked and chilled, but satisfied. Justice had been served, the regiment intact, and the shadows had done their work without a single soldier feeling like a snitch. In this line of work, sometimes that's victory enough. The red steps. Rain had left the ground slick, the mud thick between the trees as I moved into the camp. The men's tents flapped in the wind like ragged banners of surrender. I had expected drunken brawls or petty theft, maybe some wenches running off with low-ranking soldiers. But something about the air was off. The way the wind shifted through the pines, the odd, unsettling quiet. It wasn't natural. Not for a barracks, not for a camp. The missing women weren't just a nuisance or a problem of discipline. They were a signal. Someone was moving in the dark, someone clever, someone patient. And my gut, the one that had served me through more barroom fights and petty thefts than I could count, told me this wasn't the work of simple men. I dismounted near the command tent. The mud sucked at my boots like it wanted to keep me here, but I walked on. Inside, the colonel looked the same as he always did. Rigid posture, steel eyes, voice low and clipped. "Sergeant Vire," he said, "we need results. 3 women have vanished over the past fortnight. Soldiers are uneasy, morale is dropping, and rumors... Well, I'd rather not have rumors guiding this camp. Find them." I gave a short nod. "Understood, sir." "Any clues so far?" "Nothing concrete. We thought men might be involved. Jealousies, foolish bravado, but there's nothing. The tents were untouched. Belongings remain. Just gone." I left the tent and walked the perimeter. My eyes scanned the underbrush, every broken twig, every shadow that seemed off. The women weren't taken by ordinary means. Whoever did this moved carefully, cleanly, leaving almost no trace. But nature is never perfect, and neither are people who meddle with it. The first night, I spoke to the men. Soldiers shift uneasily when you ask them to reflect on missing women. Some laughed nervously, some spat on the ground, some avoided my eyes entirely. I prowled the camp, taking notes, piecing together movements. Then the trail led me to the edge of the forest where something strange began to surface, a series of small, shallow marks in the mud, almost like handholds or scratchings, heading toward the old ruins beyond the northern ridge. The men whispered of old stories, a cult, long thought disbanded, rumored to have offered women to gods older than the empire, gods that demanded obedience and secrecy. Most laughed. I did not. I had walked enough dark streets, haunted enough empty barracks to know that humans can be predictable, but cults are more dangerous. They move faster than suspicion, they hide in plain sight, and they believe in things that would make a sane man sick. I followed the trail the next day, leaving the camp under the pretense of inspection. The ruins were more than a heap of stones. There were carvings I recognized, marks of offerings, small altars covered in mold and moss. The air smelled of iron and incense, a coppery tang that made my stomach churn. Something had been here recently, very recently. Then I found them. The women, or what had been women. At first, I saw movement among the stones, quick, lithe, strange. Closer inspection revealed the impossible. Their bodies had changed. Skin flushed red, scales faintly glimmering, eyes elongated and upward slanted, limbs contorted in a strange crawling gait. They moved on all fours, then rose slowly to walk upright, red shadows among the grey stones. Their eyes, human yet alien, watched me as if calculating. They were aware. They remembered themselves, but something else had been grafted onto them. I staggered back, mind racing. The cult hadn't just taken them. They had transformed them into lizard-like humanoids, lithe, dangerous, self-aware. And I realized, stomach twisting, that these were only the first. Whoever orchestrated this would move again. The camp, the surrounding villages, no one was safe if this was spreading. I returned to camp that night with a grim purpose. Men still joked and drank, oblivious, but I could sense the tension beneath the surface. Even the strongest soldiers feel it, when the world starts to twist in ways they cannot understand. I let them stew while I planned. The first step was containment. I needed information, and for that, I needed bait. If these creatures were stalking humans, they would come to those they knew, those whose scent was familiar. The camp was too obvious, too many variables. I would need to isolate them, lure them, and observe. Only then could I strike safely. That night, as I moved along the outer perimeter of the camp, a sound made me freeze. Footfalls, not heavy like a man's, not soft like a child's, but something in between. A scraping, deliberate, cautious. I moved into the shadow of a tent flap, blade drawn. And I saw one of the transformed women, watching me from the underbrush. Red scales glinting, eyes intelligent and calculating. She moved silently, her gait unnatural, yet graceful. I let her watch. I didn't move. My mind raced with possibilities. Attack now and risk alerting the rest. Wait and risk her slipping away. I chose neither. I observed, making mental notes of her movement, her awareness, her likely reactions. Then she disappeared into the dark, leaving the faintest traces in the mud. I followed at a distance, careful, methodical. Each step I took was a calculation, a measure of risk versus gain. If I could lead her back to a controlled area, I could trap her, and through her, learn the cult's methods. Over the next several days, I set the stage. I left small items, a scarf, a bit of bread, strategically placed to entice them, to lure them along predictable paths. I observed from shadows, watched as the creatures began to investigate. Each encounter taught me more about their behavior, cautious, intelligent, capable of communication, between themselves, in clicks and hisses, that while foreign, carried meaning. I also gathered information from the men. Soldiers were talkative after a few drinks, even those who prided themselves on secrecy. They mentioned hearing strange noises at night, seeing fleeting red figures among the trees, a whisper of movement that didn't match any man, woman, or beast they had known. I filed it all away, piecing together the larger picture. The stalking began. One evening, returning from scouting the northern ridge, I sensed it before I saw it, a rustling, soft, deliberate. My hand instinctively went to my blade, but I didn't draw. I let the sound come closer. My instincts, honed through years of patrolling dangerous barracks and hunting thieves, told me to remain calm, to make no sudden moves. Through the trees, the figure emerged, red-skinned, upright, the unnatural walk perfected. Eyes tracking me. I slowed, careful to make my movements deliberate, readable, almost inviting. I didn't want to startle it. Not yet. I moved in a pattern designed to funnel the creature toward a trap I had set near the old barricades. Hidden nets, and a small contingent of soldiers positioned quietly at a distance. It was risky. Too few men and a single misstep could mean I was overwhelmed, but too many men, and the creatures would scatter. I needed subtlety and precision. The trap worked. As the transformed woman entered the designated area, her movements guided perfectly by the bait I had laid, the soldiers sprang from their positions, nets flaring, voices commanding, torches thrown to illuminate the scene. The creatures hesitated, hisses rising, eyes flashing with awareness. But the perimeter was contained. No escape. I stepped forward, blade in hand, letting the creatures know they were outmatched but not destroyed. My words were calm, even gentle, in contrast to the chaos around them. I don't know who you were or what they made you, I said, but I won't let you harm anyone else, or be harmed without purpose. Stay contained. I will find a solution. They watched me, tilting their heads, clicking softly. Awareness lingered in their gaze, a flicker of the humans they had been. And for the first time I understood, this wasn't just a rescue, or a capture. This was containment, negotiation, and study, all in one. The following days were spent organizing observation, ensuring soldiers knew nothing but their orders, to monitor quietly, preserving morale while I worked to understand the cult and the transformations. Every step, every motion, every sound had meaning. I kept journals, mapped the creature's movements, predicted patterns, and slowly began to trace the cult's operations back to the ruins on the northern ridge. The process was meticulous, dangerous, and morally grey. The creatures were not entirely enemies, they were victims in a sense. But they were dangerous, and containment was necessary. By the end of the fortnight, I had established a routine. The creatures were trapped safely within a controlled area, their behavior observed, the camp safe, and the soldiers unaware of the full horror. I had prepared contingencies, mapped escape routes, and anticipated every variable. The cult had not yet been fully uncovered, but their initial plan had been disrupted. The red steps had begun. I knew these were only the first. Transformation was spreading. I had seen the careful work, the precision, the intent behind it. And I knew that, unless stopped, others would fall victim to the cult. Others would become red-skinned, upward-walking horrors. I remained vigilant, knowing that the next encounter would be even more dangerous. But I had a plan. I had patience, and I had the shadows, which in this world are more reliable than any man, and often wiser. The night closed around the camp, fog rolling through the trees like a living thing. I stood at the edge of the fortifications, watching, listening, calculating. The creatures stirred within their containment. The cult would move again, and when they did, I would be ready. The road was never straight, the night never quiet, and the darkness always full of secrets. But secrets were meant to be uncovered, manipulated, and used. And I intended to do exactly that. Tiger trap. The air smelled of smoke and iron the morning we planned it. I stood at the edge of the clearing, boots caked in mud, and watched the camp stir as soldiers, clerics, and wizards arrived. The missing women had been the start. Now the problem had grown. Entire groups of humans, transformed, twisted into lizardkin of red, white, green, and black, moved in the shadows like a living plague, spreading fear and confusion. The camp couldn't withstand another strike, and the countryside beyond the ridge was already unnervingly quiet. I had a plan. A tiger trap. One of the oldest methods in the military playbook, scaled up for a monster problem. The lizardkin were smart, but predictable. Herd instinct, curiosity, and the unnatural drive embedded by their transformation. Herd them, flush them, contain them, and for that, I needed more than brute force. The wizard. A man of talent, arrogance, and the sort of ego that could outshine the sun. Loris Vane. He arrived, robes pristine, chin high, and eyes assessing me like I was some insect that had dared crawl across his floor. I work for colonels, lords. Not shadows like you, he said, voice dripping with disdain. I smiled, but it was all teeth and no warmth. Good thing this isn't about rank, it's about results. The lizardkin aren't going to wait for a commission. They're going to spread, and the longer we waste time, the more dangerous this gets. You're either with me, wizard, or irrelevant. He took a step back, hands lifted like he was preparing for a duel of words rather than spells. You don't understand. I am a master of the arcane, a keeper of secrets, not some... I cut him off, stepping closer, voice low and dangerous. You know secrets. About what lies in the northern ruins, the rituals that brought this horror into being. About what those red-skinned women, now monsters, truly are. Those secrets, your precious knowledge, become known in ways you won't enjoy. The change was instant. The wizard's jaw tightened, and his eyes flicked to mine, measuring, calculating. I didn't give him a chance to argue further. Now, I said. Build the wards, prepare the arcane gates, and keep your spells precise. One misfire, one miscalculation, and the trap fails. You're working for results, not applause. The cleric, a devout woman named Elira, nodded with quiet resolve. She arranged her wards and holy symbols along the trap's perimeter, ensuring that the lizardkin couldn't simply slip through or bypass the magical barriers. Every sigil had to be exact, every pattern repeated. Precisely. She murmured prayers softly under her breath, the only words that offered hope that the containment would also be safe for those still retaining human intelligence. The ranger, Kieran, moved with silent precision, marking choke points, establishing hidden nets, and coordinating flares that could flush the creatures along intended paths. His arrows were laid with meticulous care, and his knowledge of herd movement was indispensable. The trap would rely on misdirection and containment as much as brute force. My unit, Rithal sergeants and soldiers, worked with me to dig pits, construct barriers, and position themselves at strategic points. Mud, rope, stakes, nets, and smoke, all were components in the plan. By noon, the skeleton of the tiger trap stood, a massive funneling array, pits covered with mats, arcane sigils ready to trigger, nets primed, and soldiers concealed at choke points. The lizardkin began to appear as we finalized preparations. They moved in small groups first, cautious, testing our perimeter. Their colors were strange in the muted sunlight. Red, green, black, white. Their eyes gleamed with intelligence and malevolence alike. The transformations weren't uniform. Some retained traces of humanity. Others were nearly monstrous. Vane, the wizard, muttered under his breath. Some of these will make good specimens. Excellent for experimentation, rare, unusual mutations. I spun toward him, voice low but sharp. I thought I made myself clear. No experiments, no study, contain and neutralize only, nothing more. He smirked briefly, fingers twitching over his staff. Sergeant, you are brave to command what you can't possibly understand. These creatures, the knowledge contained in their forms, is irrelevant, I snapped. Not to you, perhaps, but to the lives we're protecting. Toe the line, wizard, or you'll find yourself sidelined, powerless, and exposed. He hesitated, and I knew I had won. Pride battles, yes, but fear of exposure is a stronger motivator for men like him. The funneling began. We released flares, small bursts of smoke, and arranged sounds to drive the lizardkin toward the trap. They hissed, clicked, and recoiled from fire and noise, herding themselves unknowingly toward the pits. Their intelligence allowed them to understand danger, but not the scale of our preparation. I directed soldiers quietly, ensuring coverage at every angle. Nets flew from concealment points, snaring smaller groups, while larger groups hesitated. At the sight of pits, magical barriers, and the arcane wards activated by Vine. The creatures were clever, but predictable in their flight instincts. Yyth moved among the traps, her wards glowing faintly, ensuring that the creatures didn't leap to freedom. Kieran shot arrows tipped with paralyzing potions at stragglers, guiding them gently but firmly into the containment area. The funneling worked. We had calculated it perfectly. Vane's hands glowed with arcane light, drawing glyphs in the air to seal escape routes. Yes, excellent, he whispered. Some of these could provide unparalleled insight. Do not touch them beyond containment, I growled. They are lives. Some of them may still be human enough to recognize you. The creatures surged, red scales glinting, hissing in frustration, as the pits and nets caught them. A green-scaled one tried to leap over a barrier, but misjudged the distance and fell into a pit. Black-skinned lizardkin clicked in dismay, backing into a corner, then realized the arcane wards prevented escape. White-skinned ones moved cautiously, navigating the funnel with intelligence. But even they couldn't avoid the carefully calculated traps. The chaos lasted hours, the camp alive with tension and smoke. Soldiers worked tirelessly, guided by my commands, keeping the lines tight, the nets taut, the fire and sound controlled. Every misstep could mean failure, but the planning, observation, and coordination paid off. Finally, the lizardkin were contained. Each pit, each net, each arcane barrier held them in place. They hissed, clicked, and glared at us, aware yet trapped. The sun had begun to set, casting long shadows over the containment area. Yyth moved through the containment area, murmuring prayers, ensuring the wards held and that none were harmed unnecessarily. Kieran adjusted his arrows and flares, marking escape routes and choke points for monitoring. My soldiers relaxed slightly, but remained vigilant, knowing that even trapped, the lizardkin were dangerous. I took a moment to reflect. The cult's work had spread, but we had halted the immediate threat. Morale was preserved, the creatures were contained, and no one had been lost. But I knew this was only the beginning. The transformations had been deliberate, the rituals ongoing, and the variety of colors, white, green, red, black, suggested more experimentation, more potential victims. Vane muttered under his breath again. Containment is only temporary, soon someone will want to study them. I cut him off. Not while I'm breathing. Anyone who touches them beyond containment answers to me. We're protecting lives, not satisfying curiosity. The balance of morality and necessity falls squarely on us. And we will not fail. He glared but nodded, understanding the limits I imposed. Pride aside, even a wizard knows when to follow orders, especially when his secrets are at stake. The sun dipped below the horizon. Shadows stretched across the camp, long twisting shapes. The lizardkin hissed, moved, and clicked. Their eyes gleamed with intelligence, curiosity, and frustration. They were dangerous, unpredictable, but for now, contained. I walked the perimeter, boots squelching in the mud, mind already planning contingencies. Pits reinforced, nets taut, magical barriers humming. Observation points established. Rotation schedules for soldiers, wards maintained, flares ready. Everything calculated, everything predictable. And yet, I knew the cult had more in store. The transformations were deliberate, the magic ancient and dangerous. The lizardkin were only the beginning, but with patience, planning, and a willingness to walk morally grey paths, I could stay ahead. By nightfall, the camp settled into a tense quiet. Soldiers whispered among themselves, unsure of what had transpired, but trusting in the outcome. Yyth blessed the wards, Vane muttered grudging compliance. Kieran adjusted. Traps, and I stood at the edge of it all, watching, calculating, planning. The lizardkin were trapped, but not destroyed. And that mattered. They were victims and monsters, simultaneously. Our actions today had preserved lives and prevented further chaos. But tomorrow, the cult would strike again. And I would be ready. Shadows are tools, patience is a weapon, and morality is a blade that cuts in two directions. Lizardkin were contained, for now. But the war for their souls, and the prevention of future transformations, was only beginning. Path unknown. The world tilted sideways the moment the wizard snapped his fingers. One blink, and the barracks stink of sweat, boiled meat, and bad dice faded to nothing but cold air and thin stone. The next blink brought me to a ridge that had no name I'd ever heard spoken, a place where the wind whistled like broken flutes, and the snow bit sharper than any tax collector's quill. I stumbled on my boots, caught myself against a slab of rock, and swore in a whisper. My head rattled like a barrel of bad nails. Wizards never could be bothered with what travel felt like for the flesh and bones they tossed about. To them, it was all geometry and spellcraft. To me, it was my stomach trying to crawl out my throat. I knew what had brought me here. A week back, we'd trapped a herd of transformed lizard folk, once men and women, now scaled nightmares in shades of red, green, black and white. We'd done it by sweat and rope, wit and fear, and I'd wrung the wizard into helping though he thought me beneath him. Afterward, he had muttered about specimens, eyes glinting with the hunger of men who cut flesh not for meat, but for study. I told myself I'd put a lid on that pot before it boiled over, and now here I was, whisked like an egg into some blasted pass before I'd had the chance to roll my dice. The pass stretched long and jagged, cliffs curling up each side, their edges white with snow and black with shadow. The air carried the scent of pine, iron, and something else, wet fur. I've been a sergeant long enough to know the smell of predators before I see their eyes. Wolves. I crouched and pulled my cloak tighter. My kit was still with me, sword at my side, dagger in my boot, the little flask that kept me warmer than any fire. At least the wizard had thought to teleport me dressed. That was a mercy, though not his style. Fine, I muttered to the wind. You want me here, I'll walk it. But you're not getting the last word, mage. Not while I still draw breath. The snow under my boots crunched soft, carrying sound farther than I'd like. I started down the path. The cliffs on either side were sheer, too steep to climb, too narrow to hide much. It was a throat, and I was the lump traveling through it. Behind me came a scrape, faint but sharp. Not echo, not wind. Someone followed. Teague. Every step sank heavy. I'd spent weeks in mud, nights without real sleep, meals of stale bread, dipped in weak stew, the kind that fills the belly but never the spirit. My muscles ached like old doors on rusty hinges. The fatigue made my thoughts jagged, sharp in one moment, blurred the next. Cynicism helped. It kept me moving when hope would have faltered. You tell yourself the world's rotten. Then it surprises you when something shines. It's a trick I'd learned. Same as soldiers gambling with dice knowing the game's rigged. Pretend you're already broke, and losing doesn't sting. The wizard thought me a nuisance, a blunt tool better suited to tolls and tavern brawls than matters arcane. Maybe he was right, but I knew men like him, too clever to be loyal, too proud to be trusted. If he'd dragged me here, it wasn't to do me a kindness. It was to silence me, or test me, or watch me get eaten by wolves, so his conscience stayed clean. I gritted my teeth and kept on. The pass narrowed. Rocks jutted like broken teeth. My hand stayed on the hilt of my sword. Echoes in the pass. A howl cut the air, long, low, threaded with hunger. Another answered, closer. My blood thumped faster, but my face stayed blank. Wolves are like men. They read fear in your eyes and decide whether you're supper or trouble. Best keep them guessing. I reached a bend where the cliff leaned in close, making a shadowed alcove. a good place for an ambush. I stopped, listening. Behind me, snow crunched soft again. Come on then, I said, loud enough to carry. I don't like guessing games. No answer. Just the scrape of claws, or boots, on stone. I stepped into the alcove, leaned against the wall casual as a drunkard, and waited. Whoever followed would have to show themselves soon enough. The first to appear were eyes, glinting yellow in the gloom. A wolf padded into view, white fur streaked with grey, its ribs sharp against the skin. It watched me, tail low, teeth half bared. Behind it, more shadows moved. Then another figure appeared, upright, hooded, too tall for a soldier, too lean for a farmer. It carried a staff, etched with marks that glowed faint red in the twilight. Cultist, one of the same sort who'd twisted women into scaled monsters. The wolves weren't just scavengers. They were company. Cold pass. Nice pets, I called, hand on my sword. Do they come when you whistle? Or only when you stink of blood? The figure didn't answer. It raised the staff, the wolves tensing like bowstrings. My blade whispered free of its scabbard. I was tired, hungry, and not in the mood to be meat for wolves or plaything for cultists. But fatigue does funny things. It sharpens your will even as it weakens your flesh. You stop caring how bad it hurts, only how to end it. The cultist took a step closer. I spat in the snow. You've been following me since the ridge. That makes me think you're shy. Or smart. Smart ones talk, shy ones die. For the first time, the hood shifted. A voice slithered out, dry as dead leaves. You meddle in matters beyond your station, Sergeant. The wizard delivers you to the mountains, and the mountains deliver you to us. It is fitting. Fitting, I said. Like a boot to the throat. I lunged. Steel flashed. The wolves leapt. The fight was a blur of teeth, fur, and breath that smoked in the freezing air. One wolf lunged for my arm. I turned the blade and split its jaw. Another went for my legs, its weight driving me down. I rolled, snow burning cold on my cheek, dagger flashing from my boot. It sank to the hilt in the beast's throat. The druid swung his staff, red fire cracking the air. It seared my cloak, missed flesh by a whisper. I surged to my feet, slammed shoulder into his ribs, felt bone give. He hissed like a kettle on the boil. The remaining wolves circled, uncertain. Their master staggered, and beasts know when their pack is weak. You've got two choices, I growled, blade pressed to the cultist's throat. Talk, or feed them yourself. He spat blood, eyes glowing faint red. There are more, always more. The women were only the first. The scales will cover Yyth. I shoved him down. The wolves leapt, hunger deciding faster than loyalty. His screams echoed up the cliffs, sharp and short. I wiped blood from my face, breath ragged. The snow around me steamed with death. My hands shook, not from fear, but from the weight of it all. The constant grinding between order and chaos, law and hunger. The pass stretched on ahead. I couldn't turn back. The wizard had closed that door. Wolves would keep coming, and behind wolves came worse. But I wasn't done yet. If lizard kin could be trapped, so could their masters. I picked up the cultist's staff, feeling the hum of dark magic in its grain. Dangerous? Yes. But tools are only as wicked as the hands that use them. Fine, I muttered. You wanted me dead. Instead, I'll bring the whole pass down on your head. I walked on, already sketching the plan in my mind. Wolves could be baited. Cultists could be baited too. A soldier doesn't need spells when he's got wit, rope, and the patience to wait for his prey to hang itself. And the wizard. He'd learn soon enough that whisking Callum Vire off like a pawn on his board was a mistake. Because pawns can cut throats just as well as kings, if they move at the right time. A walk of 1,000 miles. The road coughed me out of the mountains and dropped me into a bowl of wheat and smoke. Grainridge, they called it. A town that had sprung up like a mushroom after rain, squat, quick, growing, and just as likely to rot if you prodded it the wrong way. I'd spent days weaving through ridges sharp as knives, where wolves ran the timberline and shadows fell too early. My boots were leather graveyards, my shoulders stiff from cold, and the only warmth I had left was the memory of a regiment that was now a world away. The first thing I learned in Grainridge was that my chevrons meant nothing here. Sergeant of the Rifle Code? Keeper of toll and steel. Out here, it was just another foreign stripe, like a stain on cloth no one cared to scrub. The people didn't even glance at me twice. They'd seen steel before. They'd seen law before. They'd seen both crumble and burn before. The second thing I learned was that if I wanted to get back north, if I wanted to breathe the air of my own regiment again, I needed to find a wharf. The nearest one was 1,100 miles off, maybe more, depending on who you trusted. 1,100 miles of strange tongues, different coins, crooked teeth, and hands that clutched knives faster than they shook greetings. I didn't like the odds, but never been fond of odds to begin with. The town of Grainridge smelled of yeast, dung, and smoke from damp wood. Grain and barley wagons rattled down streets that were more mud than stone. Every window had shutters half hung, like they were too tired to finish the job. The people moved with the hurry of those who think if they slow down, the land will eat them alive. Maybe they were right. And then I saw it. Like a scar from an old knife fight. The Silver Gauntlet Inn. Every town worth a salt sack on the frontier had one. Same name, same swinging sign with the etched silver hand. Same boards that creaked like secrets. Maybe it was a chain, maybe a coincidence. I didn't care. What mattered was that inside, there'd be beer, stew, and men who'd talk too much if you stared long enough. The door groaned like an old dog when I pushed it open. The smell inside was fried onions, cheap ale, and wet wool. Behind the counter was a man shaped like a keg, with a bald head that caught the lantern light like it wanted to blind you. His apron was the color of grease, and his smile came out as naturally as rust. "Evening, soldier," he said. "Name's Smith, with 2 F's. Don't ask me why. Not a soldier anymore," I told him. "Name's Callum Vire." He poured a mug of ale with the care of a priest filling a chalice. "Once a soldier, always. You'll find this place don't care much about badges or colors, but a man with scars on his hands usually knows work when he sees it. You hungry?" "Always." The stew came thick and heavy with beans and pork. I ate like a man who hadn't seen food that wasn't hardtack or jerky in too long. The ale was bitter, but it washed the road dust off my throat. Smith leaned on the counter like he'd been waiting all day for someone who wasn't half drunk or half dead to walk in. "So, Northerner, eh? Rithal, if I know my cuts and stitches, what brings you to the south? Not the sights, I'll wager." "Road took me here," I said. "Now I need to take it further. Wharf's a long way, I hear." "That it is. 1,100 miles, give or take. Few who start make it all the way. Fewer still with all their teeth." He chuckled, like it was a joke that had never been funny. Then his eyes went sharp. "But maybe you're the kind that could." I let the silence hang between us. Silence always told more than words if you let it. He filled it by polishing the counter with a rag that only smeared grease around. "You're not the first rifle to come through here," Smith said. "Most pass quick, some don't. The ones that linger, well, they either find work or trouble finds them." "And which are you offering?" I asked. He smiled like a knife turned sideways. "Bit of both." Smith's offer didn't come out all at once. It came in drips, like a leaky cask. He wanted to see if I'd bite, if I'd twitch, if I'd show a crack. I didn't. I've stared down men with gallows in their eyes. I've watched officers with polished boots try to grind peasants into dust. Smith wasn't close to that league, but he was clever enough to know when he had a fish in his net. "There's been some disappearances," he finally said. "Not the kind you make posters for, the kind folks whisper about into their mugs and pray the name doesn't stick to their tongue. Couple wagoners. 1 or 2 girls from the washhouses, a clerk even. Nobody important, if you're counting in gold. But the town counts in fear, and fear spends faster than coin. And where do I come in? You've got to look. Hard edges. You're a man who can walk places other folk don't dare. The council here, they don't trust each other, let alone strangers. But a man who owes nobody, that's different. Suppose I don't care about your missing folk, I said. Smith shrugged. Then you'll care about what they were carrying. Grainridge survives on its stores, and a fair bit's gone missing along with the people. If you want to eat regular, if you want to drink something better than gutter ale, then you'll help find where it's gone. Simple as that. I leaned back in my chair. The stew sat heavy in my gut. The ale was warming my blood. But my head was already turning over the angles. Missing folk. Missing grain. In a place like this, that was a noose around the whole town's neck. You're saying there's work, I said. I'm saying there's survival, Smith answered. And if you're walking 1,100 miles, you'll need all the survival you can get. He slid another mug across the counter. Not as a gift. As a contract. I drank it. The night outside had turned to pitch. The kind of black where the stars hid like they were scared of what walked below. I left the silver gauntlet with the taste of onions and smoke on my tongue. My boots splashed in the muck of Grainridge's streets. Somewhere, a dog barked like it was warning the moon itself. I didn't know if Smith was playing me, or if the town's shadows really held something worse than drunks and cutpurses. But I'd find out. I always did. Because a man who's got nothing left but a road 1,100 miles long has to start with one step. And Grainridge was mine.